Two French soldiers are killed in Mali as the country enters the final day of fraught negotiations between the country's ruling junta, civil society groups and the political opposition. As new data suggests, the real COVID-19 death toll in Mexico could be significantly higher than the official figure of almost 70,000. We'll be taking a look at the heavy price being paid by the country's health workers. And a punishing Stage 8 of the Tour de France sees Frenchman Nance Peters storm to an impressive solo win in the Pyrenees. Brit Adam Yates, however, holding on to that yellow jersey. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Haxie Myers-Belkin. Two French soldiers have been killed in northern Mali after an improvised explosive device was detonated under their vehicle. A third soldier was injured. All were part of France's Barkhane military operation charged with targeting Islamist insurgents. That coming as Mali enters a second and final day of talks between the junta and opposition groups with a view to returning to civilian rule, something neighbouring countries insist must happen sooner rather than later. Monty Francis has the story.
In a tweet from the French Armed Forces, a tribute and a photo of Arnaud Vope, one of two French soldiers killed in Mali by a roadside bomb. In a somber announcement from the Élysée Palace, French President Emmanuel Macron broke the news, saying he felt deep emotion to learn of the deaths, citing a deep respect for their sacrifice. The Élysée withheld the name of the second soldier at the wishes of his family. A third soldier was injured in the blast. Since France's anti-insurgent operation began in the Sahel region in 2013, 45 French troops have been killed. Most recently, a soldier belonging to the same regiment as the two most recent victims died in a gun battle with terrorists in July. And last November, 13 French soldiers died in a helicopter accident in Mali. The French are fighting alongside joint forces from the G5 countries, who have suffered much greater casualties. In just the last year, at least 111 Malian soldiers have been killed in the conflict. The other G5 countries, Burkina Faso, Chad, Mauritania, and Niger, have also suffered losses. In recent months, the joint forces have stepped up offenses in the region, targeting the borders shared by Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, where terrorist activity is on the rise. Mali is still reeling from a military coup last month. In his statement, Macron renewed his call for a transition to a civil government that would support an effective fight against terrorists.
And in related news, Mali's ousted President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta has been taken to the United Arab Emirates for emergency medical treatment. According to a diplomat speaking on condition of anonymity, Keïta left for Abu Dhabi following a request by the junta that now rules the country. The 75-year-old was first hospitalized on Tuesday in the Malian capital, Bamako. The coronavirus pandemic has taken a particular toll on frontline health professionals. According to Amnesty International, at least 7,000 doctors and nurses around the world have died after coming into contact with infected patients. And no country has been worse affected in this respect than Mexico. So far, some 1,320 Mexican health workers have died after contracting COVID-19. A little earlier, I spoke to our Mexico City correspondent, Yohan Grillo.
I've just been talking to some good friends, a married couple who are both doctors at one of the big public hospitals in the south of Mexico City, and they really are exhausted. I mean, one of the problems here is that, whereas you saw in Europe this really big peak in March and April and then it going away, here it just hasn't stopped. It's been relentless. And, doctors and nurses have been really working, often they say, without having time to eat and drink properly and rest. And that exhaustion could be a big factor in why people are dying. There's also the issue of protective equipment. It's no secret there's been protests of medical personnel around the country because they're lacking basic protective gears. And I mean, I'm here in Mexico City, and if things here are bad, they're even worse in hospitals in the countryside which are very poor. So really, really a tough challenge for doctors and nurses. That married couple I was referring to are really concerned. They have 2 children and really concerned that if they were to both pass away, what would that mean for their children?
Yohan Grillo reporting there from Mexico City. Millions of children in Iran have returned to the classroom following a 6-month shutdown because of the pandemic. Saturday's start to the school year comes with fresh worries, however, as Iran continues to battle the disease. The country has the highest COVID-19 death toll in the Middle East. Monty Francis has the details.
It's the first day of class, but very little is the same at this high school in Tehran. Temperature checks, disinfection tunnels, social distancing, and masks for everyone.
خیلی حس خوبی داشتم واقعا دلمون واسه مدرسه خیلی تنگ شده بود واسه درس خوندن امیدوارم که این مریضیام زودتر بره تا با امید خدا درسامون رو باز به شرایط بهتر ادامه بدیم
15 million students in Iran are either back in class or learning remotely. More than half are in classrooms, but schools in so-called red zones remain closed. Iran is still struggling to contain the outbreak, with about 2,000 to 3,000 new cases reported each day since late May, a total of 384,000 infections and 22,000 fatalities, the highest death toll in the Middle East. In a letter to the education minister, the head of Iran's medical council warned against reopening schools, saying when an epidemic hits, schools are the first places that should be closed and the last to be reopened. But education officials defended the decision.
ما جلسات اول فقط آموزش داریم. اینها رو بهشون آموزش میدیم. بنا نیست همه دانش آموزان بیان. بنا است با یه تعداد اندکی کلاس‌های حضوریمون رو شروع کنیم و همزمان کلاس‌های مجازیمون هم ادامه داره.
Even with classes back in session, many parents in Tehran are refusing to send their children back to school, fearing new outbreaks.
Spanish children, too, are preparing for a return to school this Monday, even as parts of the country, including the capital Madrid, introduced new curbs on social gatherings. Over the past 2 weeks, Spain's infection rate has been about 4 times the European average. The country's recent surge in cases has brought the total number of infections in the country since the start of the pandemic to nearly 500,000. 8,550 new cases of COVID-19 were detected in France on Saturday, slightly down from the all-time daily high of almost 9,000 cases reached the day before. But as the infection rate soars, hospitals say the mortality rate is decreasing significantly, thanks in part to the introduction of new therapeutic treatments. Ellen Gainsford takes a look.
They may be fewer now, but there's still a steady stream of COVID patients being admitted to intensive care in France. In this hospital north of Marseille, there are currently 7, including one who's only 27 years old. After months of dealing with the virus, healthcare workers have adapted the way they treat these patients. This 81-year-old woman was admitted a few days ago, but she hasn't been placed on a ventilator. Instead, she's receiving oxygen therapy through a mask.
Ça permet de passer le cap et de maintenir une oxygénation correcte en attendant que le poumon guérisse et cicatrise et d'éviter de mettre les patients sous anesthésie générale et sous assistance respiratoire qui sont des soins invasifs et très lourds et qui peuvent entraîner des complications.
This treatment wasn't used a few months ago, as doctors thought it might encourage the virus to spread. But they've since discovered that's not the case. Other new options include prescribing anticoagulants, a type of blood thinner to prevent blood clots, and dexamethasone, a steroid used for its anti-inflammatory properties, which has reduced mortality rates by 1/3 among patients on ventilators. In March and April, the mortality rate of COVID patients in intensive care in France was between 35% and 40%. Now that's down to between 25% and 30%. While the virus can still be fatal, The combination of these new treatments is helping to improve patients' chances of survival.
Thousands of Israelis have gathered outside the Prime Minister's residence to demand his resignation. For months now, Israelis furious at Benjamin Netanyahu's handling of the coronavirus pandemic and the subsequent soaring levels of unemployment have been demanding he step aside. They also cite the fact he was charged last year with bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Netanyahu dismissing the protesters as anarchists. An attack on democracy. That's how the British Interior Minister has described the latest protest by the environmental movement Extinction Rebellion. On Saturday, the group blocked a printing plant from distributing a number of papers belonging to Rupert Murdoch. Protesters accusing newspapers like The Times and The Sun of failing to adequately report on what they call the climate emergency. Yinka Oyatade explains.
Hanging from scaffolding made out of bamboo to denounce global warming. This printing plant in North London was the target for Extinction Rebellion this Saturday. Dozens of its members locked themselves to trucks to block the road outside the plant in a bid to disrupt the distribution of national newspapers. This printing plant is home to several Murdoch-owned publications, such as The Sun, The Times and The Daily Telegraph. Extinction Rebellion says its actions were done to expose these newspapers' failure to accurately report on climate change.
This is not a diverse media, this is not a democratic media, and what we need is a diverse media that supports climate action.
The group's actions were met with swift backlash. Prime Minister Boris Johnson condemned the protests as unacceptable, while the Interior Minister dubbed it an attack against free press, society and democracy. Police say they arrested at least 70 people during the course of the protests, adding to 500 arrests made earlier this week in response to other militant action taken by the group.
A powerful typhoon is about to make landfall in southwestern Japan. Authorities warning residents to prepare for strong winds and heavy rains, with power cables expected to be brought down. The storm looks set to head north by Sunday evening, travelling off the western coast of the Japanese island of Kyushu in the direction of South Korea. Frenchman Nance Peters has won the 8th stage of the Tour de France, which took place in the Pyrenees. Brit Adam Yates, however, managing to hold on to that coveted yellow jersey. Fans' commitment to the sport has been tested this year. COVID-19 concerns meant they weren't allowed to drive up to the summit. Instead, they had to hike up or cycle. Yinka Oyatade takes a look.
The Col de Périssorde is a legendary mountain pass in the Tour de France. Hundreds of onlookers have lined the route for years, cheering as cyclists charge through. For fans, it's become a party that even COVID-19 couldn't put an end to.
On ne pensait pas qu'en période de Covid, il y aurait autant de monde. Et on s'aperçoit que c'est blindé, quoi.
Fears about the spread of the virus still forced authorities to ban cars and camping vans from parking along the mountain pass, meaning only the most courageous and passionate of fans who are willing to make the climb on foot or two wheels can witness the show.
Hace 2 horas, subiendo hacia arriba, nos gustaría llegar a la cima del col. Si te gusta, siempre recompensa. Esperemos que nos den espectáculo.
To cheer cyclists on, these Tour de France followers had to grapple with an 8.5-kilometre climb. This didn't stop Vincent and Nicolas. They set up camp and spent the night here at 1,400 meters altitude to make sure that they wouldn't miss a second of the action.
On était premiers. On a la fierté de se dire qu'on était les seuls dans la montagne, on regardait partout, on était les seuls.
Vous vous en souviendrez?
Ah ça, on l'oubliera pas.
À vie, ça s'oublie pas, ça.
There may have been less people gathered on the Col de Périssorde than previous years, but the passion for the Tour de France is still very much alive.
And finally, the world-famous New York Philharmonic Orchestra has seen its autumn season cancelled and its concert hall closed until further notice. Refusing to weather the pandemic silently, however, the orchestra's musicians are taking to the streets. Small ensembles have taken to putting on pop-up concerts around the city, much to the delight of live music-starved locals. Well, that brings us to the end of this bulletin. Thank you for watching, and we'll leave you with a recent rendition of Mozart's Allegro in G major from the New York Philharmonic Orchestra.